Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. The SNP Government motion calls on this Parliament to express deep concern at the contents of last week's budget. Now, if you dropped into Scotland from another planet and just listened to the SNP spokespeople commenting on the budget over the last 7 days, and indeed even if they had been listening to this debate today, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Mr Swinney, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, had morphed into Private Fraser from Dad's Army. We're all doomed, he says. We've not been given enough, he says. We've been asked to cut too much, he says. But in a letter to the Chancellor in advance of the budget, he said, and I quote, "I appreciate that at this challenging time for the UK and Scottish economies, you face a number of competing objectives." Well, Deputy Presiding Officer, indeed we do. But in Mr Swinney's alternative universe, it would seem to be the rest of the UK that has to face the challenge and not Scotland. In the same letter, he commends the Chancellor's flexibility in financial planning that allowed the Scottish Government to bring forward over £300 million of capital from their 2010-11 budget to this year. And again, quoting him from the same letter, "a vital stimulus to the Scottish economy at this crucial time of recession, estimated to safeguard 5,800 jobs." That is what Mr Swinney said then. But with the SNP and Mr Swinney in particular, you just know that there will be a whinge coming from somewhere. He expresses concern about the UK Government's fiscal stimulus in comparison to action being taken elsewhere, particularly America. The state of Maryland, much quoted by SNP spokespeople, is receiving £2.6 billion from their central government. They have a population of 5.6 million compared to Scotland's 5.1 million, so it's no fair. We want more, they say. Tricia Marwick was somewhere else in America in her contribution. But they moan on, and I quote, "Analysis by the Scottish Government shows if money used to fund the cut in VAT had been used instead for capital investment, it would have supported twice as many jobs in Scotland." Now, James Kelly reminded us of the bank bailout and how much that cost, and of the £2 billion as our share of the fiscal stimulus. And for Mr Brown's information, when he derided the VAT cut, the Centre for Economics and Business Research said, and I quote, the figures are clear, the VAT cut is working." And the IFS said, "This policy change is likely to be a reasonably effective economic stimulant. Those dismissing it, as Mr Brown did, dismissing it as a failure, ignore the likelihood that things would have been worse without it." But what are the facts as opposed to the fiddled fantasy figures of Messrs Salmond, Swinney and the SNP? Fact, and if Mr Swinney wants to challenge them at any time, I'll let him in. Scottish overall budget will increase next year and the year after that. Not my figures, and as we've heard, but those from the Finance Committee's adviser, Professor David Bell, from SPICE, the Parliament's policy experts, and as Mr Kerr and Jackie Baillie highlighted, even the Minister's own Director of Finance. Fact, the UK Government will spend an extra £400 million in Scotland next year, a devolution dividend. Fact, there will be a Barnett consequential. Well, the SNP laugh, but they'll be very grateful for the devolution dividend at the Royal Bank of Scotland and HBOS. Fact, there will be a Barnett consequential from the UK Government for Scotland, totalling £104 million, including £104 million for housing, £27 million for energy efficiency, £12 million for training and employment, £17 million to build FE colleges, another devolution dividend. Fact, there will be an additional winter fuel payment worth £100 for the 160,000 Scots over 80 and £50 for Scots over 60. A total of 750,000 households will benefit. Another devolution dividend. And fact, 540,000 Scottish children will benefit from the £20 increase in child tax credit. Another devolution dividend. And to paraphrase Christina McKelvey, stronger together, weaker apart indeed. I could go on, but there's plenty more. But I think by now the Chamber should have had the message that far from expressing deep concern at the budget contents, the SNP, the Tories and Liberals, whose amendments actually support this nonsense, should be welcoming the measures taken to help those looking for a new house, looking for a job or training, looking for some financial assistance to run a business, and for help to meet heating bills and the cost of raising a family in these current difficult times. Now, just before I go on to contributions, I'll hear one from Mr Adam.
Brian Adam.
I'm grateful to the member for giving away. Would he care to explain why it is that only the Labour Party in Scotland are thinking that this is a wonderful budget, as opposed to the view taken by their colleagues in Wales, who take a diametrically opposite view?
I don't think I said it was a wonderful budget, but I did point out the benefits that Scotland is reaping from the budget. So let me now look to the contributions made during the debate. Derek Brownlee made an ageist remark about the Labour front bench. He must have known it was my birthday last week. But he should remember words of the leading world economist Paul Krugman, who, when asked if things would be better under David Cameron if he was running the economy, said no, they wouldn't. And I agree with the one comment from Jeremy Purvis, who said there will never be a Labour budget the SNP will say is good for Scotland. Brian Adam tried to outdo Mr Swinney's private Fraser impersonation, while Tricia Marwick and Christina McKelvey went on a Thelma and Louise type road trip around America and Italy, and both disappeared over the same rhetorical cliff. Jackie Bailey's excellent contribution completely destroyed any lingering SNP spin that Scotland's budget will go down next year. Now, of course, Deputy Presiding Officer, we know that Mr Swinney's real deep concern is the fact that he is being asked to make some efficiency savings. Yet he thinks nothing of top-slicing the Scottish Government's funding for local government, or threatening that unless they agree to impose zero council tax increases, they will receive no share of the £70 million set aside for local government support. But when it comes to Scottish Government efficiencies, it is a different matter. Again, referring to his private Fraser persona, we are doomed to see 9,000 jobs go as wicked Westminster asks for a Scottish Government to make its contribution to an overall efficiency drive. The First Minister even made a rare appearance at Westminster to spout this nonsense that Scotland was being robbed of £500 million. It is a real pity he is not paid an attendance allowance for his visits to the Commons, as that would certainly save the public purse some money. And again, the facts do not back the SNP rhetoric. I have already mentioned the letter to the Chancellor and Mr Swinney's gratitude for the capital advance. Now, as Mr Kerr highlighted, he and the SNP, with typical sleight of hand, want to claim that Scotland's budget is being cut. And as we have heard, the truth is in the SPICE figures. Scotland's budget will increase next year and the year after that by 3.9% and 0.5%. And as for efficiency savings, well, I am pleased to report that the Government has been doing well with these. Budgets between 2005 and 2008, they have saved around £1.7 billion. According to the Government's Director of Finance, in evidence to the Finance Committee this week, when asked if she was confident of hitting their 2% target, replied, yes indeed, because over the previous years we have actually exceeded the target. But when I put it to her that if that was the case, could the Government not exceed its 2% savings target, she replied, that's clearly something ministers will have to decide. So, Presiding Officer, there you have it. The Scottish Government is comfortably reaching 2% efficiencies, could obviously do more, and all Mr Swinney has to do is to provide the political will. Instead of working against Westminster, he should be working with Westminster. Yesterday and again today, we heard how all the governments within the UK are working together to combat the effects of swine flu. We should expect the SNP to do the same to help the UK combat the effects of the global recession. Deputy Presiding Officer, to conclude, the UK Government budget has provided help where it is needed most to families, business and pensioners. The SNP claims that Scotland's budget share is being cut has been exposed for what it is, a fiddling of the figures to forecast grievance. Now, the SNP have failed to deliver their local income tax, they have failed to deliver their Scottish Futures Trust, they have broken manifesto promise after promise. In short, they were elected on a false prospectus, and that should be a deep concern for the whole of Scotland, who now see that the SNP have not got what it takes to govern.